Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Strefan, Morer Progenitor, a red-black vampire kindred deck with a high power persuasion. This is one of our donation decks of the week, coming from Wavy Monkey, who says, I'm a somewhat new Magic player, and this is the first deck I've actually built and not copied from a YouTube video. Now, the problem my deck has is it seems to run out of steam pretty fast, and I'm lucky if I'll be able to take out a player, but nothing more. I also find myself having a hard time if my commander gets removed once or twice. The second problem is I usually find myself vulnerable to attacks since I'm always tapped out. My play group all have pretty high-powered decks. We don't run 2-card combos to win, however we all have powerful individual cards and removal is common. I really prefer this vampire commander as opposed to a go-wide Edgar Markov deck, and combat damage is my win con with a little bit of artifact burn to help. I would really appreciate any recommendations and advice whether I included too much tribal or kindred elements and need to branch off. Since my group proxies, I have unlimited budget. For sure, Wavy Monkey, we've got a lot we can say, especially about the concept of playing higher powered decks and building these kind of higher powered decks and figuring out where you want to land. With that in mind, let's look at our commander and get right into it. We've got a lot to cover, so let's jump in. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Strefan, Morer Progenitor, and what do they bring to our high-powered vampire deck? Strefan is a 4-mana red-black vampire noble, 3/2 flying. They have 2 abilities. The first one says, at the beginning of your end step, create a blood token for each player who lost life this turn, and their second ability is whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice 2 blood tokens. If you do, you may put a vampire card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn. Fairly straightforwardly, this is a cheat into play commander. Very interestingly, it comes from hand, not from graveyard, which is less common in black, but red definitely has this, so it does match up. You need those blood tokens, but Strefan themselves generates those blood tokens. Now, something that immediately pops into my mind is Strefan does need actually both haste and a bunch of blood tokens in order to take advantage of their abilities. Otherwise, you can wait a turn cycle, play them, ideally you've damaged at least 2 players, yourself maybe, and another one, that you can get those 2 blood tokens, get back to you, go to combat, sacrifice them, and get that trigger. But that's a turn cycle. If you can have the blood tokens in advance and then attack with Strefan with haste, you will immediately get that advantage. So there is some benefit to giving this, especially at higher powers, to have this commander have haste. But speaking of higher powers, before we go too far into this deck, let's talk about higher power commander. Now, judging by what I'm seeing, we are not quite CEDH in terms of what I would call philosophy. Namely, our deck builder mentions that players aren't playing 2-card combo, and CEDH is a form of Magic where you play the strongest possible things, so nothing is off the table. But they do proxy cards, they do play tutors, such as Demonic Tutor, and they do play some fast mana, such as Mana Crypt and Mox Opal. So we're not quite CEDH, but we're close. And something that we need to address when we get to this power level, and this is specifically towards players like our deck builder who might be somewhat new to Magic, is that our philosophies of building have to somewhat change. There's a few reasons for this. One of the first reasons is that our deck itself tends to be more powerful than our commander. You can see, and though to a degree this has changed a little bit, but the majority of CEDH decks are more interested in the strategy of the deck than what the commander brings to the deck. Don't get me wrong, there's a few very specific exceptions, things that are like Prosh, things that are like infinite combos with your commander, but most of the time, your commanders are valued for the colors and advantage, especially card advantage that they bring, and secondly to a kind of very specific niche kindred or otherwise plan. So things like Timna and Thasios are there for card advantage and very powerful partner commanders. So when we are looking at high-powered cards where the individual power of a lot of cards is so high that the removal is incredibly cheap and or accessible to all players. Players are playing very good counter magic. People are playing very good like Swords to Plowshares. It's just guaranteed. Everyone has tutors. Well, we have to find a way to manage both our opponent's plans and our own plans at a very high level. What does this mean? This means we have to play the speed game. Either we play incredibly quickly and we have combo decks that win very, very fast if not interrupted, or we have to bring interruption to our opponents. You know, we have to interfere with their game plans because otherwise they're just going to knock us out of the park. Playing creature damage in a high-powered format as your main kind of plan, and a lot of this plan kind of leaning on your commander who cheats your vampires into play, allowing for a curve that looks like a plateau because these cards are meant to be cheated into play and not cast. It does create this kind of situation where you are probably the middle of the road on terms of speed, and you don't really have the control over the game to make up for that. So that's going to come into like my last bit of additions. But first we're going to look through what I really think we should be doing is we're going to look through the creatures. We're not going to go too long in them, and we're going to cover some of the ideas that I want to go into them right off the top. But there is clearly kind of an imbalance between the strongest cards you can cheat in and the weakest cards you can cheat in. Before we do that, really quickly, it is worth looking at our lands and curve. Our lands are 34 lands. We could probably play one or two more. We are playing Mana Crypt, Mox Opal. Mox Opal feels a little weaker here due to the difficulty to generate enough blood tokens versus something that generates, because our blood tokens are a little inconsistent, is what I would say, and therefore there might be turns when you play Mox Opal turn one when you really want those 3 artifacts and there's just nothing you can do. So with that in mind, I wouldn't mind going up to 35, 36 lands. We're very, very low on 1 mana cards. If we come here, we can see we have 2, Soul Ring being one of them, Call of the Netherworld, which is a card we obviously want to discard from the blood tokens to madness a card back into our hand. So it's 0 cast, but even then, this is also not a good card for this deck, so I would say cut it. Blasphemous Act can be a 1 mana spell, but we're just really, really low on 1 mana. We're kind of anemic at the start of the game, and then when we are strong, really does feel to that mid to late. Likewise, we can see 4 mana is one of maybe our 3rd highest number, and for people who've seen the channel a lot, you know that I really don't like having so many cards that match our commander's mana cost, because they kind of compete on the same turns when you have 4 mana. Now, though this deck heavily benefits from Strefan, you're not always in a position that you have to cast them. Like, for example, Anya coming up and generating blood tokens, and then when you play your commander generating another blood token can be very beneficiary to cast out first, so you can set up a situation where you have enough blood tokens without your commander's first ability triggering. That's really important. Likewise, if you really want to go and gain some cards, Twilight Prophet, when you are behind, might be more attractive to play before Strefan, but we're going to get back to that idea in a second. So we have kind of a mid-game plan, and I imagine, and I don't know, but I imagine your opponent's strategies are probably lower to the ground. So with that in mind, I want to go, as I said before, we're going to go through the vampires. This is the main thing we're going to do. A lot of the rest of the deck I think is generally fine. I think things may be a little overcosted here and there, but aren't terrible. And we have this weird mix where we have like Deadly Rollick as a free spell, but we're also playing the Devil, which is probably overcosted for what it is. But I think most of that section kind of balances itself out. We have nice artifacts mostly, the enchantments are okay. I think this is all fine. So with that in mind, let's focus on the vampires and let's try to be critical on how valuable it is to cheat out those vampires. And I'm going to say one more thing before we get into it. I keep pushing it back. The last thing, because this is the main mentality I want to apply, is that our lack of 1 mana vampires is very revealing. If we can make an early group of vampires, like Creeping Bloodsucker obviously is one of the strongest thing because on upkeep, you'll deal 1 damage to each opponent, and then Strefan, when you cast them, will see that and give you 3 blood tokens. But when we don't have that, and we have like, you know, a bunch of not very strong and only a few 2 mana creatures, if we had like a small army of 1 and 2 mana vampires, by the time we play Strefan and we can attack 1 or 2 opponents, we could generate those blood tokens pretty safely, leading up to a very good play the turn after. So I would like more 1 and 2 mana vampires. I haven't really suggested them because there are other places I want to put pressure on. Okay, that's it. Let's go through our creatures. Cordial Vampire feels very much so built towards lower mana curves. Cordial Vampire is very good when you have a bunch of vampire tokens or a bunch of small vampires, that as things die, and things die quickly, you grow a board incredibly fast. Aristocrat strategies, token strategies, Edgar Markov strategies are very, very keen on this card. However, a lot of the time, when we have bigger creatures like Nirkana Revenant, we don't really care how big Nirkana Revenant is because we can, 1, change her power and toughness pretty easily, and 2, she is a utility creature. Likewise, Vein Gripper, as well, a very, very strong card with evasion. You know, we don't really, as a 6/5, we're not too interested in putting 1 or 2 +1/+1 counters here and there. We really care more about the sheer, like the 6 that they come in with, and though it's cool to have extra points, those +1/+1 counters will be only 1 body as opposed to like a ton. So I'm not saying take out Cordial Vampire, I actually want more of Cordial Vampire. I want our curve to drop so you have more small creatures to use this ability on. Once again, there are a lot of options. I don't want to go through them all as we have a lot to go through. Creeping Bloodsucker is great. Dockside Extortionist is a very powerful card, especially in high power. Reckless Fireweaver, I think, is just a little too cute. I do like how it works with our commander, but I think we're going to have a hard time for this to be anything but a worse Creeping Bloodsucker. Something worth noting is because of this power level, we are playing cards like Demonic Tutor. We could play Vampiric Tutor. We could play Diabolic Tutor. Diabolic Intent. These 2 mana and 1 mana tutor spells can be very, very good. And instead of running a card like Reckless Fireweaver as our second non-vampire version of a strong vampire card, we can just run more tutor spells to guarantee that we grab Creeping Bloodsucker. Does that make sense? That's going to come up a few more times. Voldaren Bloodcaster, I think this is fine. It's on theme. I do appreciate it creates blood tokens. I like that it has evasion, works well with other things. And on the other side, this is cute. The Bloodbat Summoner is cute. The one thing that's kind of unfortunate is that I kind of prefer that front side of her than the back side, because generally I prefer to be generating more blood tokens, but I think it's rare for you to have 5 blood tokens and not have been like sacrificing them to your commander, so that should be fine. Drana, much like our Cordial Vampire, is built for a large, wide amount of creatures, with smaller creatures that will grow much bigger with those +1/+1 counters. Very strong commander, I think, or legendary creature, I should say. Often slept on. I do think that she should belong in the final draft, but we just need to support her with lower mana creatures. Falconwrath Forebear, very nice. Once again, we're in blood tokens. I have no problem with that. We can move forward. Florian, same thing. Actually, Florian is not blood tokens, though. It's in one of these 2 sets. Florian is interesting. I think I don't like this as much in the current build. Much like the other cards I was talking about, I want to reduce the curve because let's say Florian let's say you do what, like 3 damage with a creature. Let's say Florian, you attack with Florian, and you go to your post-combat main phase. So you've done 3 damage, and you're going to exile 3 cards out of your deck. Well, we can see here that the majority of your deck, let's see, 4, it's 11, that's 11, that's 22, and then 12. So more than a third of your deck is 4 mana and up. If you're playing on curve, you can only play one of those cards. If you've already cast something else or you're trying to do something else, you might not be able to cast a card from there at all, and you are definitely going to have a hard time casting multiple of those cards, which is fine because you only get 1 each time, but it is worth noting that you're going to be hard-pressed to be able to do something like powering through the cards in your hand. The fact that Florian's cards they're impulse, right? They only stay for the turn means whatever you pick, you have to cast it right away instead of cards in your hand. And, sure, you could say, okay, so I picked up Vein Ripper, Sengir the Dark Baron, and Olivia's Attendants. I could just put the one I don't ever want to cast in exile, put the other 2 at the bottom of my deck, and maybe at another point after I shuffle my deck, I'll have another chance to grab them. But I think you're generally just going to be exiling these cards and not casting them. So I don't really like that. Once again, if we reduce the curve, I don't think it's a problem, but at the current setup, I'm not too impressed by it. You might say, well, Curse, what if I had cast Dockside Extortionist, and then I can cast these huge creatures off of Florian? Yeah, you could do that, but to be fair, you could do anything off Dockside Extortionist, so I don't really see that being a good combo. So once we reduce the mana cost, I think this will be a lot better. I think this is a very strong card in the deck, so I do like it. Markov Baron is very good, very much so. I like them in terms of with blood tokens, but obviously, once again, much better when you go much wider, especially with that Convoke. You want to go very wide, you want to have low mana creatures, you want to make more vampire tokens, so great card. Let's adjust the deck a little more for it. Anya, I think, is fine, as mentioned before, blood tokens. Bloodline Keeper feels okay. As we're getting into our 4 mana and higher, now I'm getting to the point that I want to look at every single card and say, hey, do we want to cheat this out with Strefan? And Bloodline Keeper, I definitely do not want to cheat out. Like, they just generate a 2/2 vampire every turn. That's too slow at this power level. When you cheat them out and you attack with a 3/3. I guess you can transform them in the moment, and then you just attack with a 5/5. In order for you to be transforming them, you need 5 vampires, and if you cheat this into play, it is very strong, but you need to cheat this into play, you need 5 other vampires, and then you need a black mana in addition to transform this. I think it's a little much. As a 5/5 indestructible attacker, it's not bad, but the real power they bring is by, boosting the rest of your vampires, and I think this is just kind of clunky here, so I'm not a big fan. Also, once again, at 4 mana, I don't particularly like it. Blood Tracker, I think, is fine if you can funnel mana into them. I think they're just fine. It's interesting, but it is kind of a big mana sink in a deck that does have a hard time having enough mana to do everything. So I'm not going to say cut it, but it should be on your radar. Henrika Domnathi. Henrika Domnathi. Got it. She is very, very interesting, but does not work well with being cheated out, because by the time you cheat them out, you don't get this trigger. Both of these triggers seem kind of fine. You definitely want to use to draw a card and lose a life, and then unless you have tokens or vampires you're willing to let die, you're not too keen on using that each player sacrifices a creature. And then when she's transformed, which you can't do if you cheat her out, she has an interesting mana sink ability, but otherwise is a very big vampire Nighthawk, if you're familiar with the reference. Flying Death Touch Lifelink is what I'm referring to. With that in mind, as being another creature that is a mana sink and is very clunky and doesn't have a very clean way of doing something, I too would relegate her to out of the deck. She's so cool. So cool. I really, really like her, but here I don't think this is what we want. Camber the Plunderer, are we playing our human companion? The human companion is just mono red, if I believe. So no, we are not. Okay, let's go back. This is something that creates blood tokens, so I think it's fine, but it is somewhat of a weaker version. You have to use this with combat or other interaction in order to generate those blood tokens, and at 4 mana, being the same mana as our commander, I'm not very interested in them, especially with a lack of evasion. I appreciate that they can be partnered. If you're playing the partner, they get a little better, but even then, I'm kind of medium. I think this is a pretty easy cut. Mirkwood Bats feels very much so kind of too weak at this point. Don't get me wrong, I do see the incidental damage, but I'd rather you go much more into tokens, which you can before this is strong. So once again, if you go towards lowering the mana curve, adding a bunch of tokens and token generators, having more blood tokens, this will be very good, but at the current build, I think it's too weak. Also notably not a vampire. Olivia Volderan, or Volderan, once again, let's just cover it real fast. A not very big creature that's 4 mana that has at least evasion, but 2 mana sink abilities in a deck that lacks a large amount of mana to generate, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I do understand there is a situation where you cheat her out with Strefan, and then you have, what, 7 mana to steal a creature? I don't know. And you lose the creature the second your opponents remove Olivia, who is incredibly vulnerable to common removals such as Swords to Plowshares, or after the indestructibility fades, Lightning Bolt. I don't see this. I think this is easy cut once again. Sanctum Seeker, once again, better when you are lower to the ground. However, even then, we have a creature that when cheated into play, has no ability, is just a vanilla 3/4 because you've already missed this trigger, and whatever creature you do cheat into play will never trigger Sanctum Seeker because it doesn't declare an attack, it's just attacking. So Sanctum Seeker feels like, once again, relegated into a more Edgar Markov style than this kind of deck. Twilight Prophet, though I referenced it earlier as an interesting card you might want to cast, I think without having enough tokens, once again, we have a lot of, I guess to sum it up, we have a lot of vampires that benefit from us going wide with tokens, and we just don't have the token support at the moment. So a lot of these are either going to have to be cut or supported. That being said, Twilight Prophet is not good enough no matter how you look at it. It is, you first of all need 10 permanents in a deck that wants to cheat out things and not generate tokens at the moment for this to be good. Even then, it's beginning of upkeep. It's a 2/4, so it's not even threatening that way, and its ability is just kind of okay. I'd rather just have Dark Confidant and take the damage myself and draw cards. This is too clunky. We can remove them for sure. Anawan, better. I do like Anawan's kind of pressure, and this is one I want to keep. A bit of a spoilers on the additions, but I want to pressure our opponents into not being able to have their full strength. And Anawan is particularly good at that. We will remember that we do have non-vampires, so we will have to sacrifice sometimes, but I do like Anawan here. That being said, you don't want to cheat this out, you just want to put them into play. Attacking with an Indestructible 4/3 isn't bad, but like, you just have better targets, so this is probably a creature you are casting fairly, but if you have no other creature that's better than this, cheating out a 5 mana creature is not nothing, so I do appreciate that. The waiting for the upkeep sucks, but not the worst thing. Bloodline Necromancer is very, very strong here. Big fan. I love that it has an ETB. These are the kind of cards I want to cheat into play. A card that comes in, it has an okay amount of damage, it has lifelink, which is nice, but the ETB is the real reason you're playing it, because it cheats out, reanimates something else, and you are getting advantage from that. Bloodlord of Vazgoth, not as ideal because, one, you need Bloodthirst, and traditionally when you cheat this out, you have not already done damage because you are going to attack, or you're cheating off of attack. If you do have the Bloodthirst, it is a 6/6 flying, which is at least a decent body, but you will note whenever you cast a vampire creature spell, it gains Bloodthirst 3. That is not the same as creatures, as your vampires entering the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters, right? This means that your tokens do not get +1/+1 counters, your creatures that you cheat into play do not get +1/+1 counters, and still, once again, for them to get the counters, you need to have already done damage, which you have means to do. But I think because of how clunky this creature is and the fact that it's just a 6/6 most of the time, I'm not too interested. I think this is an easy cut. Champion of the Dusk, fantastic creature. Once again, ETB draws you cards, better with more vampires. 10 out of 10. Draena, the Last Blood Chief. This one's also a little difficult because this is a creature that wants to attack, and if you cheat them into play with your commander, they will not attack, right? They have already been declared, they've already been chosen, sorry. They do not declare an attack, they are already attacking. So remember, you won't get this trigger, but this I'm a lot less hard on because I think that the ability is strong enough, the 4/4 flying indestructible, that first attack is good enough, and when you cheat this into play, your opponent's waiting for that next attack. It makes it something they have to deal with, and I don't mind that here. At 5 mana, that's still a pretty good cheating into play. I don't mind it. Malakir Bloodwitch, ETB, number of vampires, we love it, let's keep going. Queensbay Paladin, once again, this is pretty close, but definitely good. The finality counter's a bit rough. The fact that it attacks, it's an attack trigger as well, is really nice. I will say, as I said a bunch of times, it will not trigger on that first attack, but you don't mind because you can cast this, you can cheat this into play, get a vampire, pay some life, that's fine, and then on your next turn when they're, if they survive that turn cycle, you get another good attack in. Pretty good. Westgate Regent is a card I really like. This is one that I think is definitely worth cheating into play because of how quickly it grows into a threat. The ward is very, very good. Going from 4 to 8 to 16 makes it a 1-card threat. This is one I want to keep for sure. Crossway Troublemakers, I think, is cute. It has a static ability, which I like a lot more, so all your creatures have Death Touch and Lifelink when they attack, even the ones you cheat into play, so that's great. Whenever a vampire you control dies, you may pay 2 life if you do draw a card. Once again, really, really good if you have tokens and smaller vampires. So do that, and this becomes very strong. A great creature to cheat into play, a 5/5, Death Touch Lifelink, so even if it doesn't have evasion, I think it's pretty strong, so good keep. Marionette Master, I don't think belongs here. I just do not think you generate enough tokens regularly for this to be good. It also kind of interferes with your main game plan of your artifact. Your blood token strategies spread damage, and your attacks kind of like, they deal singular damage, right? And Marionette Master is in the first kind of group of artifact-based damage, but it doesn't spread damage, right? It just declares damage directly to one opponent. Is that terrible? No, I don't think it's bad. I wish we could boost Marionette Master, which is the main thing that makes me think that they don't belong here. If they were a vampire, obviously it'd be much better, but when you can put +1/+1 counters onto Marionette Master, she becomes very, very dangerous. Here, she's just kind of going to be okay, and in order for her to be good, you already need a bunch of blood tokens ready to sacrifice, and then you need 6 mana because you can't cheat her into play. I think very easy cut. Necropolis Regent is a fine card. Not very strong most of the time, but I think, once again, if you go really wide, very good, and as a 6/5 attacker that turns into a 12/11 the next turn, much like Westgate Regent. Very, very good. So I do like Necropolis Regent in this deck. I think it gets out of the range of burn quickly. We'll probably eat a Swords to Plowshares, but if you are ahead and you have a pretty good attack happening, including your commander, Necropolis Regent is a fantastic cheat into play. Nikana Revenant as well, very, very strong. Doubling your black mana out of your swamps is fantastic. Olivia Crimson Bride, much like that Draena, it has a reanimate on attack, but we do not get it when we cheat her into play. That being said, the fact that she's a flying haste creature is already a lot better, so if you do have to cast her, you get her ability right away. Her ability that like you lose control of the reanimated creature once you don't have her is actually any legendary creature, unlike her previous Olivia Volderan, which is much better, and because of obviously how your deck works, you should have legendary vampires. I think this is fine. I wouldn't mind a few ways to put your creatures into graveyards. Entomb, Unmarked Grave, those kind of cards catch my eye, Buried Alive. But otherwise, I think this is fine to buy back a creature every now and then. She's just kind of small, like a 3/4, when I'd rather her be a bigger creature. So she's kind of outclassed by the rest. So maybe I'm going to say cut her, but it's close. Olivia's Attendants, stronger than Olivia dramatically. And honestly, very good. Coming in as a 6/6 menace that has indestructible when cheated in, allowing you to generate 6 blood tokens if they... Actually, yeah, whenever they deal damage. So it will generate 6 blood tokens. This is very, very good. This is definitely one of those creatures I'd like to cheat in as fast as possible. And then having a mana sink attached to this card is also nice. It is kind of weird. Like, the mana sink is good because it allows you to generate more blood tokens, but blood tokens themselves are also mana sinks. So it's a mana sink creature that generates mana sinks. I think it's just really made up for the fact, like, this is better because we deal in blood tokens and the sheer number they make, plus the Menace 6/6 is really, really good. Patron of the Vein, very strong, ETB, static ability, love it, love to cheat it in. Sengir, the Dark Baron, is not particularly good, easy cut as a 4/4 that grows, but you can just do so much better with all of the other creatures, cut them for sure. Timothar, I really don't like this card. It's just so much work to read this and understand it, and even then, I think it's just like a very specific mana sink creature that costs too much mana and also needs like you to have mana at the right time. Easy cut, 4/4. Even with the ward discard a card, the 4/4 flying indestructible is not a hit I'm very interested in. Vein Ripper, on the other hand, fantastic creature, 6/5, very good ward. Very good, only drain on one opponent, but good pressure, fantastic. Zagros, Thief of Heartbeats, the party thing I don't think is very relevant. Flying Death Touch Haste is fine. Giving other creatures Death Touch doesn't really do much for you. I mean, I guess it works really well as a combo with Olivia's Attendants for 3 mana to destroy a creature, but even then, just fine. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. Are you worried about planeswalkers? This card is just not very good for sure, so I think I would cut them. Very quickly, let's sort by subtype. We have 2 clerics, 2 rogues, and that's 2 warriors, 3 wizards. So we can assemble a party. But even then, I really don't think we want to cast this. This is just kind of an okay creature. It's still a 4/4. It still doesn't do much. I guess if you cast it for like 3, you're happy. But I don't know how often you're doing this outside of a dedicated party deck. So with that in mind, I'm none too impressed. Butcher of Malakir is our last creature, and therefore I love it. It's a weird sentence. I love it because it's Butcher of Malakir. I don't love it because it's our last creature, but very, very strong card. Very, very powerful. Fantastic. Great. Okay, so I've told you to cut probably a lot of creatures. I'm not going to go through all of the low mana creatures, but I want to go into some additions to help the deck function at a higher power level, because a lot of attention on this deck is the vampire kindred aspect to it. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds there, because yes, we can improve a lot of the vampire kindred deck, but I think you're still going to be knocked out by your opponents who are playing just stronger decks than you. So I want to support you in that aspect. And then after that support, you can start looking at some vampire and some blood synergies, though I do have some blood synergies and vampires first. So right off the top, an incredibly powerful card at this power level is Dark Ritual. It just allows you to cheat a lot of cards into play, namely a lot of the last cards I'm going to show you can be cheated into play by Dark Ritual, which I'll bring up again. Just incredibly powerful. Please play this card. All right, so I wanted a few more blood token enablers, especially at lower mana, so I have 3 cards here. Volderan Epicure is just kind of an okay creature, does 1 damage to each opponent, which I think is relevant the turn your commander comes out, whenever your commander is out, generates a blood token, that's it. Once again, like, just good early vampire to do some damage, a good early blood token, pretty happy there. Blood Tithe Harvester is a very strong creature. Not only does it also generate a blood token by itself early on, but then you can sacrifice it to kill a creature, especially if they're indestructible. You can get through that, and by the end or mid-game, you should have enough blood tokens that you should be able to take out, you know, really powerful cards, take out commanders and things like that. So I find this to be strong, especially at higher power. People are playing very strong low mana creatures, and so Blood Tithe Harvester can even take those out early game, and I think that's very much so worth it. And if your opponents remove this card, I think you're generally okay with that if they waste a card on this. Obviously board clears will just get rid of Blood Tithe Harvester, but most of the time you should get an advantage or a clean 1-for-1 plus the blood token trade. Arterial Alchemy is a card that I really, really like, and I don't see very often. I should note to buy one myself, because I always think that when I see this. It is very deceptively powerful. One, just in terms of a blood token deck, it is very good. It generates 3 blood tokens, unless one of your opponents is out of the game, and that's a pretty good deal for 3 mana. 3 mana for 3 artifacts. 3 artifact tokens is very, very strong. It works really powerful with your general kind of blood token strategy by making all your blood tokens into equipment, which is fantastic, but it's just good. It's just a good little rocket you forward, and if you aren't, like, this isn't for this deck, but if you are not playing blood tokens, but you are playing like equipment in red, which is somewhat common as Boros and Mardu are big colors for equipment, Arterial Alchemy is really, really strong because it just generates 3 equipment all at once, right, for 3 mana. And the equipment itself is okay. They are mana sinks still. It is still mana to equip each of these, but if you are an equipment, you can cheat that cost and equip 3 equipment to a card. If it's like a Pure Steel Paladin that draws you 3 cards, it's very, very good. So this is a card I especially like here, but I like everywhere else as well. We are talking high-powered decks, and we are proxying cards. Let's talk about some high-powered card draw. Necropotence is a very, very powerful card. It has gone down in price due to reprints, which I always like, but it is kind of the premier black draw as long as you're not in too many colors, and you're not. Using Necropotence to keep refilling your hand is going to be very, very good. Just note, as you discard cards for any reason, we'll get back to that, you may not reanimate those cards later. Another one you have access to is Black Market Connections, another one that's very strong here. Notably, treasure tokens, draw cards, and creating changelings are all very good for your deck, especially because those changelings are vampires. I think you're going to have a pretty good feeling about that, and depending at what point in the game, there's several times you can just pick all 3 and get very far ahead. I also think those treasure tokens work with a lot of different synergies you have in your deck, and notably will ramp you a little further in the game. Do remember you have to pick one, so there is a downside, though I don't think it's real. Since MH3 just came out, Necro Dominance is a very open one for you to play. It's obviously not as strong as Necropotence, but it's still very, very good. That being said, it permanently rests in pieces your deck, so reanimation cards get really bad, but it is powerful. I'll leave it up to you to think whether or not. I would definitely play the first 2 before this, but if you really enjoy this and enjoy this ability, Necro Dominance is very good as your 3rd one. I'm definitely going to try to pick up a few myself. All right, with Blood Moon on the screen, let's get into Disruption. I alluded to this earlier, and generally I want to talk about the fact that your opponent's decks are very, very strong, and if you just let them do what they want, you're going to lose the game all of the time, because the main way you defeat your opponents is by being incredibly threatening on board, which makes you most visibly the enemy, which means your 3 opponents will team up to take you out, and so they'll just take, whenever you get too close to winning, they'll take you out, and otherwise you can't really stop them. You lack counter magic, you lack a lot of ways to interact with them outside of creature removal, which is just not always enough at this power level. So Blood Moon is one of the cards I want to talk about and start with about disrupting your opponents. Also, Magus of the Moon does the same thing as a creature, so I wanted to put 2 copies in. You may have to go through and adjust your mana base. I forget how many fetches you're playing, but you should definitely play more fetches and other ways to get basics. But if you can ensure that these moon effects come out against your opponents, there's a lot of times that they're going to be caught unaware and be very much so punished for it. Note that at this power level with people proxying, people do not want to play basics, especially people want to play usually 3 or more colors, because that's the kind of fun of proxying, is you get to put together decks you just don't want to budget for, and 5 colors or 4 colors is often in that pile. So if you can land Magus of the Moon, or if you can land Blood Moon through counter magic, which is tough, but you can make it happen, it is incredibly powerful and can shut certain opponents out of the game permanently, or at least for enough time for you to knock them out of the game. So I like them very much so here. Now we're going into black, and black's side of this is a collection of cards that I always enjoy as very good disruption and very good pressure on your opponents. And this is the trifecta of some discard enchantments. The first one's Oppression. Whenever a player casts a spell, that player discards a card. Obviously affects you, but that's okay. And this is very good against your opponents who want to cast like 5 to 6 cards in a turn and get very far ahead in high-powered decks. The other one is Bottomless Pit. This one I don't like as much because you want to keep the strong vampires in your hand so you can cheat them out. So not giving you a choice is kind of rough, but at the same time, these cards are so, not symmetrical that it's generally fine for you to do this, especially because you have some reanimation. I think it's going to be fine. As a third option, I don't always suggest, is Lily of the Veil. So these last 3 cards are all discard cards at 3 mana in black. I said I get back to it. Dark Ritual will allow you to play all of these cards on turn 1, being incredibly powerful. Lily is just fantastic pressure at any, her -2 is just sometimes used, but her ability to just pressure all your opponents out of cards turn after turn is very, very valuable, especially later in the game when you have vampires to defend her. Very, very good. All these 3 are fantastic, and they lead into the one I like the most, which is Painful Quandary. It punishes only your opponents, and as they are lower and lower on cards, it basically locks them out of the game, allows your damage to be much more powerful, because now when you knock them down to 20 health, they have 4 spells without discarding that they can cast. If you knock them down to 15 health, that's 3. Every decision, every spell they cast becomes a painful burden, let's say, on their life totals and on their hands, because you can only discard so often. One more I wanted to suggest, I don't think this is very good, but I wanted to suggest it anyways. Pain Magnification can be very good if your opponent's decks are much like yours, like your group, all play aggro, very high-powered proxied, but all kind of aggro kindred decks. Pain Magnification can do such a big deal here because you don't have to be the one to proc it. You can slam Pain Magnification. Yes, your commander will hit. Yes, some of your stronger vampires and your smaller ones that have grown will hit to cause discard. But you can cast this and let your opponents just force each other to discard cards. Make a lightning bolt into a discard as well is very, very powerful. So I think this is neat. I don't know to what degree I think it's good enough, but I wanted to point it out anyways. Coming near the end, a card that you could play that I'm not sure of anymore, but I thought of it at the start. Thorn of Amethyst is just really good when you're so much into creatures, so depending on your number, you might play this. Just can really, if your opponents are susceptible to this card, this will be very, very good. If not, don't use it. And finally, coming to an end, because this video's gone on for a while, is, as always, Lightning Bolt. Please play Lightning Bolt. It is a very, very powerful card, and it works really well with having more 1 mana cards. That's generally what I have to say. I think this is a very, very good, early first draft, and I do get it. If I was new in Magic and was given a proxy budget, this is probably what I would build as well. It makes sense. It is a powerful kind of tick upwards from learning the game and playing at middle level power levels or using other people's decks. This makes sense. However, as you learn and as you become a better deck builder, you'll learn that this has a limit and a ceiling, and you've just kind of found yourself into one of its ceilings where you're kind of middle heavy, you're kind of low on low mana cards to kind of establish boards and interact with your opponents, and you're especially low on interaction in a pod that desperately needs it. So I hope this video was helpful to you. I would love to see another draft of this deck because I am interested to see what you're going to do with it. Please let me know or send in the next draft. And yeah, thank you so much for sending the deck, and thank you for supporting the channel. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.